Okay, hello everyone. Okay, alright, let's see what I can do here.
Attention real estate investor.
Okay, so is consciousness obsessed with endless sight? And is there such a thing as a non-physical nostalgia for infinite continuity? You see, what I've realized is that it's like the world is a verb and human beings are interpreting truth as a noun. And they're wondering why their truths are incomplete. This episode is just inspired out of my fascination that we're all here existing, procreating. And it's kind of like the purpose of let's say a conscious evolutionary animal is to continue existing. But since this conscious evolutionary object has become a subject to itself, it is now fascinated by the continuity of its subjectivity. So what that means is we don't want to just pass down, we don't want just human bodies, we want also human behaviors, you know?
So I start off with the laser gun this time.
Okay. Sorry, guys. I'm having a bit of personal difficulty giving this episode. And really, what can I say? Every day, I speak into a cyber microphone, wondering about what we as 8 billion creatures are gonna do, you know? And it's kind of interesting because I've wondered about why intelligence is here, and intelligence to me, I've concluded that it's here to strategize. There was a very profound, poem passage in the work of Rumi, this poet from 700, 800 years ago, Jalaluddin Maulana Rumi. He says, before death takes away all that is given, give away all that there is to give. And so it's a suggestion that before your eyes close, you are an unknown attention that is possessing some. You are possessing, or better yet, you are an occupant of the space-time continuum. You know, our bodies are living on Earth, our minds are living in and acting as the world. And so the revolutionary realization that the mind is incomplete, it's a suggestion that first you got to be honest, then after that honesty, you got to discriminate, you know? So for me, life was just this one thing that was happening. Then it was a dual thing. And now it has become multidimensionally beautiful. You know, at first I thought there was only one mountain to climb. Now I realize behind our eyes there are 8 billion mountains. In front of our eyes there is one. But what's the brilliance? It's kind of like you learn to fly behind your eyes, and then you fly outside. You know what's funny? They say the eyes are the windows of the soul. And that made me kind of, laugh sometimes, because it's as if your soul is looking throughout your eyes as if they are windows. And so I thought, like, yo, man, for how long is my soul going to just look out a window? You know, am I living in the karmic pattern of like a, Elizabethan queen that's just, sitting and staring out a window, like. And then I realized my eyes were not just these eyes, and everything changed. So what was just one thing happening now has come to a point to be a multiplicity with different dimensions. And there's just this humility that the human being is, it's kind of like a cup, and the knowledge of the world, the vastness of the information in the unknown is like a waterfall. And really there's two components to it. First, what kind of container are you turning yourself into? And then, at what level of the cup are you fulfilled? You can say some people are full when life is halfway. Like when they halfway succeed, they're like, that's enough for me. And there's some people who, their life takes it, they take life to the brim and they're like, man, I'm so close, but then they're like, oh, whatever, you know. And then there are some who are like, because it's one life, let me overflow. Really, what life is that you're an unknown self in an unknown world. And as you experience life, you get to know it, and then you select. One of the most fascinating things about consciousness, that it is leading to an observe and then select process. And some people are like, they say some people are afraid of dentists, but like, imagine this picture right now, it's a dentist's office in the future. So anyways, what I'm saying is, I'm pretty much wondering, like, okay, we're all considering ourselves as human beings, great. We're all considering ourselves as intelligent, great. We're considering ourselves as alive, right? So that means there's intelligence is present and able. There's a quote from Hafez that it's often one of those quotes that is very deep. I find it has a very deep impression for me. And Hafez says, I've come to realize that at the end, every heart gets what it wants. And it's interesting because sometimes you don't know what your heart wants or what your mind wants, for example. And we're living in a time where it's hilarious, The world needs leadership, but people don't believe in leaders. You know why? Because of ego. Back in the day, like, people were like, this is what I find the world's going to. Ever since what media did, what the information age did, was to give people access to archetypes that they never would have had access to if they hadn't traveled. The world is so incredible now. Right now it's so hilarious. We don't have teleportation, but somebody in Japan can live stream a waterfall, and it's as if when I turn on YouTube, it's as if like, yo, Japan teleported to my screen. And you know what I've realized? Everybody is kind of conditioned to be a good person, but you don't realize who you are. There's some people, you call them a bad person, they'll be like, yo, I'm not a bad person, you're a bad person for asking me if I'm a bad person. Like, but then there's some people, you tell them you're a good person, they're like, oh, thank you, it's like, oh, you're acknowledging, oh my God, I always knew I was a good person, now you're telling me I 100% know I'm a good person. And then there's some people, you ask him, are you good? And he says, no. It's like, why? It's like, okay, it's like, are you bad? And the person says, no. And then you say, okay, what are you then? And the person says, why do I have to be something? And then the person thinks about, because you have to choose between good or evil. And then the person says, how do you know good and evil exist both at the same time? Have you wondered what the soul is? The soul is the awareness to the simultaneity of the objective existence and subjective experience moving. So right now what's going on is very fascinating. Why? Because I'm a human being that has managed to find a rhythm in the moment where my body is technically moving in a subtler way, right? My brain, and at the same time, my inner realms are moving, right? I may be some guy sitting on a car in Earth, but when I close my eyes, Earth is in my view. It's fascinating. When I was younger, I mean, even now it fascinates me. I've reached a certain point where it doesn't matter if truth is based on information or not. Most people think truth is information, so they're like, "Yo, man, give me truth. How do I get truth? How do I find truth?" And then it's at some point, truth is about who's looking at the information. Do you see what spirituality is? That means if you look at religion, if you look at science, they're both outer realm focal points. What should we do in the outer realms? What is true in the outer realms? But a spiritual person's like, hold up, guys. Before we think about what is true in the outer realms, let's for a second wonder how the inner realms is happening. And the reality is, do you understand? Because we've lied to ourselves, if we tell ourselves the truth, then we'll be like, why did we do what we did before? Many people don't care about liars, okay? Many people think like, yo, liars, like, get this scum out of my presence, you know. Even Aristotle was like that. He would say, like, I think it was Aristotle, he would say anybody who lies is creating simulations, versions of themselves they have to remember all the time. You know? That's the power of honesty. It's simple movement, simple living. So let's say you're someone and you found your soul. Your whole life you were looking for what's missing. And you were like, yo, is it in my children? Is it in my wife? Is it in my parents? Is it in my, what do you say? Like, is it in my neighbors? Is it in my friends? Is it in my nation? Is it in my species? Is it in my planet? Is it in my solar system? Is it in my galaxy? Is it in my universe? Is it into everything? And then it's as if the mind reaches a point where it sees how vast the problem we're trying to solve here is. Right? The issue of consciousness, I shouldn't say issue. But it's as if it's like I'm wondering, why are we here? And we're here to kind of continue being here. And it's weird, right? Because it's like there's a vertical evolution and there's a horizontal evolution. The horizontal evolution is like endlessly exists till the end of time. The vertical evolution is in some sense kind of like an expansion of dimensions. As if our body is our membership in a finite universe, and our mind is our membership in an infinite universe. And there is an inconceivable witness. The soul is really nothing to talk about because it is the awareness to everything in a moment. So the awareness to everything can't be anything. When Buddha said the nature of objects are empty, do you know what that means? That means you realize you're not a self. The person was like, wait a minute. If an object doesn't have meaning until I look at it, let's say I call this object in front of me a tree, right? Before I look at it, that object is not a tree. It doesn't have that meaning in my mind, right? That means it's like the object exists, but it doesn't have a subjective experiential existence. And so Buddha was saying that when our attention goes to an object, the objective phenomena is empty, and it's the nature of our mind, or it's our attention that our mind's attention that imbues it with the nature. So if you look at let's say you look at a car and you're like, yo, that's just metal, That's some dirty metal, you know. It's as if you realize the car is not a car until you look at it, and then the moment comes where you're like, wait a minute, is it also the case that when I am not conscious, I am not a self? Like, what is sleep, guys? How have we all been sleeping and then fearing death at the same time? It's weird, doesn't make sense. So death is like the stopping of the existential journey, right? But our psychological journey is sleeping every time we want to take a nap. And we're like, yo, this blanket is comfortable. I'm going to step out of consciousness, log out of consciousness. So,
Study music production.
oh my God. I think one day AI is going to find a way to, make advertising companies rich without them, disturbing the psychological piece of, the human species. You know? So, there's something I want to read for the viewers. Something I pretty much asked this title from ChatGPT. I was like, okay, this is one of those things I want to see what it says. And so it came up with a very interesting answer. It says, some philosophers, he says, perception, which is the process of interpreting sensory information from the environment, is an essential aspect of consciousness. Sight or vision is one of the most important senses for humans and many other animals, as it provides a wealth of information about the environment, including colors, shapes, movement, and distance. Yeah, this is obvious so far. Some philosophers and scientists have argued that perception is inherently active and constructive, meaning that the brain actively processes sensory information and constructs a mental representation of the environment based on past experiences, expectations, and goals. This means that what we see and experience is not simply a passive reflection of reality, but a complex and dynamic interpretation of sensory information. That's exactly what I wanted to, where I'm going with this. So here it's ChatGPT is being like, kind. He says, therefore, it is possible that consciousness is not necessarily obsessed with endless sight, but rather with actively perceiving and interpreting the environment through all available senses, including sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. Yeah, when I was saying sight, I was saying sometimes I wanted to be poetic. I mean, I was thinking if I could use the word experience instead of sight, but it didn't have the same catch to it. Is consciousness obsessed with endless experience? But endless sight is like a very interesting view, because what would an endless sight be? We're kind of like a sight that will end one day. So take this in, that I think actually for the first time in human history, the idea of spirituality has become healthy. You know why? Because the human species is creating multiple lives for a singular experiencer of a dualistic existence to juggle. So the main point is that when it says this means that we see and experience is not simply a passive reflection of reality, but a complex and dynamic interpretation of sensory information. What it's saying pretty much is that before we actually, it's like what we think is actually us seeing the world is this massive brain process, or that mind process, or projective brain mind process, Okay, where in this mind process, based on how your brain simulated itself in the past and how complete that self was in accordance to what it wanted to complete its goal. So do you understand what it's saying? It's pretty much saying that pretty much the human being is this creature existentially, yeah, your body's slowly changing, but experientially throughout the day, based on your attention going to multiple things, it's kind of bizarre. But a person who has like, imagine, one day I'll give a very deep talk on what I consider, you know, mental illness to be. But I would say, for example, those people who have ADHD, it's a suggestion that their attention is going to, like, if the average person's attention is to 5 things, it's like this person's attention is to like maybe like 20 things like throughout the day. Do you know? So this means that the person's brain is simulating itself multiple times throughout the day rather than just once. Like, for example, when I give these talks, every inner event that passes my mind, my brain has to literally use a sort of creative improv to be like, okay, how does that change who I am? Right? Because the cool thing about speaking, and when you become very mindful of your own presence, when you speak, you're also hearing yourself. Like, I don't think the viewers realize this. I'm hearing myself say these things also for the first time. In the inner realms, they're known, but in the outer realms, for example. So, what does it mean that consciousness wants to endlessly access information? It's because consciousness is convinced that it's not a creature of information. Do you understand? When you realize you're not something, you find a freedom with that reality. Why do we have imagination powers as human beings? Simply because consciousness is finding itself more free than how the sensory information is defining it. What that means is, imagine the conscious experience of sensory information. The moment that's happening, it's kind of like a clay master, okay, or a clay maker or something, right? Is like making like a person with the clay, is making an image, making something with the clay, right? And then, but consciousness, the one who's making, that means the moment the brain receives information, because it's receiving it and it has a sense that it was something before it received the information, the brain knows it's not the information, right? So that means deep down our intelligence knows it is not sensory information, but it uses sensory information. So it's kind of saying that you're not, this might sound bizarre, but it's kind of like saying the soul is not in the world, the soul is using the world through the mind. So for me, there are kind of like 4 challenges that the human species really has. Four areas. Imagine they're like four mighty tasks that must be attempted. Okay, there's these 4 great things that must be done to ensure the advancement of human consciousness from Mr. Within's view. So what I've done is that there came a moment where I was like, I was very impressed by how a philosophical quote from like Friedrich Nietzsche could be like a message in the bottle. For example, he had this quote where he said, "God is dead and man killed him." Do you know? And he's pretty much saying the divine was converted into nothing. The moment we considered we're just objects, our access to the other, let's say, other realms became meaningless. You know? This world is so fascinating, where what tends to happen is that things appear, then they grow, then they integrate, then they become a new space, a new soil, and then new things emerge. So what it is everything is creating an opportunity for everything to just endlessly evolve. Do you understand? Everything is evolving through everything. Like, sure, you could say, yeah, the creature, dodged, like, made, was like our ancestors were smarter than all the other people who were alive. That's why we're here today, for example. Culture may suddenly shift. In the future, people may start having lots of kids, following this idea that it's the expansion of the presence of an attention in the realm. So anyways, guys, thank you for listening. This topic can go further, but I guess one last thing I could say about a non-physical nostalgia of infinite continuity. And by the way, guys, there's right now it's 10 p.m, so there's a Discord event right after this. So everybody's welcome to join that. And then what was I saying? A non-physical nostalgia for infinite continuity. So this would be as if an eternal being forgot it's eternal and became temporary, then as a temporary being wondered about how it does something temporary, what does the temporary mean to the eternal, and it's literally the concept of infinity. So a non-physical nostalgia for infinite continuity, it's like another way of saying it's like you're from the future, and the future is infinite. So you're from an infinite, imagined, timeless, collective future, and since it's beyond time, it can be any point in time. That means the future has achieved such a victory that it has nothing else to do than to come back to the past, maybe. I don't know, in one talk, I got so emotional. I was like, yo, some species got to the advancement, got to that golden threshold. And it's like, that's how the future, that's how there's an interdimensionality here. Anyways, guys, thank you for listening. I'll see you on Discord. Rise, mankind, rise.